In 1997, 4 young drivers were appointed by Williams to compete to become the test driver for the team in 1998 in the hopes of landing a drive in F1 in the future. These were Frenchman Nicolas Menassian, who finished 4th in the British F3 series the previous year, fellow Frenchman Sohail Ayari, who was the 1996 French Formula 3 champion, Brazilian Max Wilson, who finished 2nd in the South American F3 series in 1995, and then finished 10th in the German F3 series in 1996 due to him missing the last 2 meetings of the season, and a Colombian young driver by the name of Juan Pablo Montoya. In 1994 and 1995, JPM would finish 3rd in both the Barbasar Pro Series in America and the British Formula Vauxhall Championship respectively, before moving to British Formula 3 in 1996, where he finished 5th. Throughout 1997, all 4 drivers would compete against each other to see who would become the next Williams test driver, and after a grueling year, Williams ended up choosing Montoya to become their new test driver from 1998. During that season, Montoya would compete in Formula 3000 again with Supernova Racing, and after finishing runner-up to Ricardo Zonta in 1997, missing out on the title by 1.5 points, one would go one better to win the Formula 3000 title after a close fight with McLaren test driver at the time, Nick Heidfeld. For the next 2 years, however, JPM would go back to America to compete in the kart series with Chip Ganassi Racing, which in later years would become known as Champ Car before folding at the beginning of 2008 as a result of merging with IndyCar again. And in his first year at kart, he proved to everyone why he was a hot prospect for the future, as he would win the kart title in his first season, taking 7 wins in the process. 7 wins that would prove crucial, as he would beat Scotland's Dario Franchitti to the title on a countback of wins. Seems JPM has a bit of a knack when it comes to being in a title decider that ended on a countback, although the other one, which you can check out in the card on the top right, didn't end in the same way. 2000 didn't end the same way as 1999, as although Montoya would pick up 3 more wins that year, he ended up only finishing 9th in the championship after a frustrating season. However, the year wasn't all doom and gloom for JPM, as during that year, he and his team Chip Ganassi would compete in the annual Indianapolis 500, which was part of kart's rival series, the Indy Racing League, or IRL for short. And in that race, Montoya, in his first attempt at the infamous race, would come through to win his first Indy 500. Although he had never raced around the famous track, he was able to adapt very quickly to start the race from the front row and convert that into the win after an amazing drive to become the first rookie to win the race since Graham Hill in 1966. After impressing in America and also impressing in the junior formula, it was only a matter of time until Montoya was in Formula 1. It was just a question of when rather than if. During the year 2000, Williams signed Jenson Button to partner alongside Ralf Schumacher after winning a shootout against Brazilian driver Bruno Junqueira after Alex Zanardi failed to impress in 1999, switching back to Champ Car. However, despite having a good rookie season, it was very clear that Jenson was essentially a seat warmer, and this was reaffirmed when in August of that year, it was announced that Jenson would be loaned out to Benetton for 2 years with an initial plan to return to Williams for 2003. And it became clear why Williams loaned Jenson out, as a month later, it was announced that JPM would be making his F1 debut in 2001 with Williams. After 4 years testing with Williams, Juan had finally made it to the big time, and he would be driving for a team that had won many championships in the past and had just started an exciting new partnership with BMW. People were finally going to see what all the hype was about. So, let's see how he got on in F1. The 2001 Formula 1 season saw a few regulation changes compared to 2000. Firstly, the look of the cars looked different compared to 2000, with the front wings being 50mm wider and the amount of elements on the rear wing being reduced to a maximum of 4. Each wheel now had 2 tethers to reduce the wheels flying off in case of an accident, with more padding being added inside of the chassis in order to protect the driver's legs. These changes were done to slow the cars down, although thanks to the tyre war, this didn't work. Speaking of which, the main change that everyone was talking about was the return of a tyre war for the first time since 1998. However, instead of it being Goodyear taking on Bridgestone, it was instead French tyre manufacturer Michelin that would make their Formula 1 debut in 2001. One of the teams that ran Michelin's that year would be the same team Montoya would be making his debut with, Williams. Going into the season, there was a lot of hype surrounding Juan, given how impressive he had been in previous seasons. However, the season would get off to a tricky start, as in the first race in Australia, he qualified down in 11th, and then in the race, he would retire thanks to his BMW engine giving up on him. Then in Malaysia, Montoya would stall on the grid, forcing him to take the spare car, and then he would retire later on after beaching it in the gravel when the extreme weather arrived. Because of these two races, JPM was not able to demonstrate the speed that people were hyped about in the first place. However, at the next race in Brazil, Montoya would finally be able to demonstrate that speed and made sure that if people were not taking notice of him before, they would certainly remember him going forward. After the safety car came in, due to Mika Häkkinen stalling on the grid, Montoya got an amazing launch compared to Michael Schumacher to dive bomb the reigning world champion into turn 1, catching him napping, and take the lead. It was an amazing move and one that is still talked about today. For many laps, Montoya withstood immense pressure from Michael, and it was looking like the Colombian in only his third ever race would actually take his first ever win. However, on lap 38, any hope he had of winning would come crashing down, as after letting JPM lap him, Jos Verstappen, father of future world champion Max, would misjudge his braking at turn 4, taking himself and Montoya out of the race. It was heartbreaking for everyone watching, as Montoya's first win was taken away through no fault of his own. However, despite retiring from the race, Montoya had impressed everyone and had proved he could be one to look out for in the future. It also proved as well that Williams had made a huge step forward compared to 2000, as they now had a car that could challenge for wins again. Imola didn't go so well for Juan, as he would retire thanks to clutch issues, meaning in the first 4 races, he had retired in all of them, whilst teammate Ralf Schumacher would go on to take his first ever win and Williams' first win since the 1997 Luxembourg Grand Prix with Jacques Villeneuve. But thankfully for Juan, that would change at Barcelona, as after a frustrating start to the season, he would finally finish a race. But not only would he finish the race, he would also not only grab his first ever points, but also his first ever podium. It would have been 3rd place, but he ended up inheriting 2nd on the last lap after Mika Häkkinen cruelly retired on the last lap thanks to his clutch and engine giving up on him when he was looking certain for the win. The next 3 races for Juan would be a disaster, as after leading for most of the race at Austria and having an intense fight with Michael Schumacher again, which led to the pair going off at Remus, he would retire later on thanks to an hydraulics issue and then would crash out at the next 2 races at his first ever Monaco Grand Prix and at the Canadian Grand Prix, which also took out Rubens Barrichello, both of which were caused by driver error on JPM's part. Then at the Nürburgring, he would get his 2nd ever podium with another 2nd place before retiring again at Magny-Cours thanks to another engine failure as he was leaving the pit. He would finish at Silverstone but would miss out on a podium after battling both the Ferraris of Michael Schumacher and Rubens Barrichello. Then at Hockenheim, Montoya took advantage of the straight line speed Williams had with their BMW engine to take his first ever pole position, leading a Williams 1-2 on the front row. And despite the race being red flagged early on, Montoya showed some amazing pace and was looking set to finally take his first ever win. However, an issue with his fuel rig during his pit stop cost him the lead to teammate Ralf Schumacher, and then 3 laps later, he would retire on the pit straight thanks to yet another engine failure. Then, after a dreadful race at Hungary where he finished outside the points in 8th, as back then only the top 6 were given points, he would take his 2nd ever pole at Belgium, but would then stall on the grid, forcing him to the back of the pack. Then, after the race was restarted, due to a red flag that was caused by a scary accident involving Eddie Irvine and Luciano Berti, Montoya would suffer yet another engine failure as he was carving his way through the field. It seemed every time Montoya was in a position to win his first ever race, something always went wrong. Surely good luck had to come at some point, right? Well, thankfully for Juan, he wouldn't have to wait too long. At the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, Montoya would once again grab pole position, and despite losing the lead to Barrichello on lap 9, he would regain the lead later on in the race as a result of him being on a 1-stop compared to Rubens being on a 2-stop. And after a brilliant drive, he would finally come through to take his first ever win. After many failed attempts throughout the season, Montoya finally made it to the top step of the podium, and fans hoped it would be the first of many. He could have won at the next race at Indianapolis after taking the lead from Michael Schumacher at turn 1, however he would end up retiring thanks to another hydraulics issue. Then at the finale in Japan, he would round off his season with a second place finish behind Michael Schumacher. At the end of the season, he would finish 6th in the championship, 6 points behind the man who would go on to have an infinite sabbatical, Mika Hakkinen. Despite the amount of mechanical failures, it was overall a good first season, and he will be hoping to build on that in 2002. However, 2002 would end up being a frustrating season. For 2002, Williams launched the FW24, and whilst it was a step up compared to 2001, it wasn't perfect. One, the car's strength was on one lap pace, as in 17 races that season, Williams took pole in 7 of them, all of them coming from Montoya, who during that season had proved he was undoubtedly the best qualifier that season, similar to Charles Leclerc in 2022, with him taking 5 poles in a row from Monaco to France, and even beating Keke Rosberg's record, which he had held since 1985 for the fastest ever lap in Formula 1 at Monza. However, when it came to the race, Williams only won one, and that one race didn't come from Montoya. It came from his teammate Ralf Schumacher at Malaysia, who led home the first Williams 1-2 since the 1996 Portuguese Grand Prix. Throughout the season, whilst it was good on one lap pace, it just couldn't match the far superior Ferrari F2002, which made its debut at Brazil after Ferrari used an updated version of the F2001 for the first 2 races. Throughout most of the season, Williams were mainly battling with McLaren, which they were able to beat comfortably to second in the Constructors. However, they were some 129 points behind Ferrari, with Montoya finishing a career best 3rd in the standings behind both Ferrari drivers. For 2003, despite initial plans for Button to return to the team for 2003, Williams kept both Ralf Schumacher and Juan Pablo Montoya, and the team itself needed to step up if they were going to beat both Ferrari and McLaren in both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships. However, whilst the Williams FW25 looked promising in pre-season testing, it ended up being another frustrating start to the season for JPM. In Australia, Montoya was looking good for his second career victory, before dropping the back end at the exit of Turn 1, handing the lead and victory to David Coulthard, which in turn would turn out to be the Scots' final win in Formula 1, with Montoya finishing behind in second, just in front of Kimi Raikkonen and Michael Schumacher. In Malaysia, Montoya ended up finishing down in 12th and a lap down due to being involved in a first lap collision with the Jaguar of Antonio Pizzonia, which forced him to pit for a new rear wing. Then, at the rain-affected Brazilian Grand Prix, Montoya would crash out after aquaplaning at Turn 3, along with many other cars during the race, including one Michael Schumacher. At Imola, Montoya would have a frustrating race, finishing down in 7th before finishing in a lonely 4th after fighting with teammate Ralf Schumacher at Barcelona. Then, at Austria, Montoya was once again in a position to win the race after Michael Schumacher had issues during his first pit stop, before once again his BMW engine let him down. Just like in 2001, anytime Montoya was in a position to win a race, something had to go wrong for whatever reason. However, at Monaco, he would finally get some good luck, as after an amazing drive from himself to jump teammate Ralf Schumacher in the pit stops, he would come through to take his second career victory after a winless 2002, and with it, win his first ever Monaco Grand Prix, meaning he had won 2 of the 3 Triple Crown races, with the 24 Hours of Le Mans being the only one left that he has yet to win. The next race at Canada was another race Montoya could have won had he not dropped it in the same way he did at Melbourne at the last chicane, which saw him finish 3rd behind the Schumacher brothers. Then, at the Nürburgring, Montoya would finish 2nd to teammate Ralf, despite having a collision with Michael Schumacher, which Juan somehow avoided a penalty, and then would finish 2nd again to Ralf at Magny-Cours, which led to Juan being frustrated with Williams, as he believed that the team were making strategic calls that favoured teammate Ralf, despite having equal number 1 status at the team. Another second place finish was followed at Silverstone, after Montoya inherited the place from Kimi Raikkonen due to the Finn making a mistake at Stowe, before Juan took a dominant victory at Michael's backyard at Hockenheim, which thanks to Michael sustaining a puncture, saw him finish 7th, and Kimi crashing out on lap 1 saw Montoya move up to 2nd in the championship, and saw him only 6 points behind Michael, which would then become only 1 after Hungary, after Montoya finished 3rd, with Michael a lap down and off the pace in 8th. After a tricky start to the season, Montoya was now in a position where he could finally compete for his first title in only his 3rd year in Formula 1. Ferrari had seemed to have lost their ways over the last few races, and it was looking like either Montoya or Raikkonen would win the title. However, at Monza, Ferrari bounced back with Michael taking victory after a close fight with Montoya, increasing his lead slightly to just 3 points. But then at Indianapolis, Montoya's hopes of winning his first world title would come crashing down. After a terrible start which saw him drop down to 7th, Montoya would tag the side of Rubens Barrichello whilst fighting for 6th at turn 2, giving himself a drive-through penalty. As he was exiting the pit after he took his penalty, the rain which had been prevalent for most of the race had now wetted the track, meaning JPM had to do a full lap on dry tyres before he could switch to wet. This meant he ended up a lap down and was only able to finish 6th. And with Michael winning the race, it officially ended Juan's hopes of winning the title, as even though he was 10 points behind, he wouldn't be able to surpass Michael's win total come the end of the season had it gone to a countback. And to compound his misery, he would retire at Suzuka due to another hydraulics issue when he was looking good for the victory, ending any chance Williams had of winning their first Constructors' title since 1997. At the end of the season, Montoya finished 3rd in the championship, 9 points behind Kimi Raikkonen and 11 points behind eventual champion Michael Schumacher. Even though 2003 was a step up compared to 2002, the fact that Montoya lost the championship the way he did was gutting for himself and his fans, even if what happened at Indianapolis was his fault. Many people have attributed this to the change of construction that Michelin had to do before Monza, but in my opinion, I think that explanation has been overblown. I'll explain why later on. Despite being in the fight for the title, Montoya was still frustrated with Williams, as along with what happened at Magny-Cours, Juan believed that the team didn't value him, as it was alleged that he was earning around $5 million less than his teammate Ralf Schumacher. And so as a result, it was announced during the off-season that Montoya would be leaving Williams at the end of 2004 due to the fact that he still had 1 year left on his contract to join rivals McLaren for 2005 alongside Kimi Raikkonen. However, as mentioned, Montoya still had 1 more year left to do with Williams before he went to McLaren. 2004 ended up being a disastrous season for Williams, as it was clear that along with McLaren, they had taken a step back compared to 2003, as along with Ferrari once again having a dominant package like in 2002, thanks to their infamous F2004, combined with the fact that they had fell behind both BAR and Renault, who themselves had taken a big step forward, the team ended up finishing 4th in the Constructors, with Montoya taking the team's only win that season at the finale in Brazil after the team turned a corner in the second half of the season after ditching their ugly front nose design, dubbed the Walrus by many fans. In an interview with Steve Ryder for Sky F1's Legends of F1 programme, Montoya claims that 2004 was actually his best year at Williams, despite going backwards compared to 2003, as he believed that because everyone at the team knew he was leaving, and the fact that they weren't fighting for the title, it meant there was no pressure, and it led to a relaxed atmosphere in the team, which Juan even says that had it been like that throughout his entire time at Williams, he probably would have stayed and not joined McLaren. Given 2004 ended up essentially being the start of Williams' downfall, it was kind of a blessing in disguise that Montoya left for McLaren, but even those years would end up being a nightmare for Juan. 2005 saw a raft of regulation changes which brought an end to the Ferrari dominance. However, the first half of the season would end up being a disaster for Juan, as in the first 2 races, Montoya was only able to finish 6th and 4th respectively, despite promising signs McLaren had shown during pre-season testing. Then, at the next 2 races, Montoya would end up missing them due to injuring his arm, which he claims was caused by a bizarre tennis accident. I'll let you be the judge on that one. He would return at Spain, but he could only manage 7th, with his teammate Raikkonen taking his and the team's first win of the season. Then at Monaco, Montoya would be forced to start from the back as a result of causing an accident in practice with David Coulthard, Jacques Villeneuve and Ralf Schumacher. He would make a great recovery to 5th in the race after being in a big battle for 4th on the final lap, despite being involved in a pile-up that was caused by a stationary Christian Albers. At the Nürburgring, Montoya would finish a dismal 7th in a race that saw teammate Raikkonen have a dramatic suspension failure on the final lap, costing him of a certain win. Then at Montreal, Montoya was in a position to potentially win his first race of the season after inheriting the lead from both the Renaults, who themselves had ran into issues. However, during the safety car period, which was brought out due to Jenson Button crashing into the wall of champions, Montoya, after finishing his pit stop and still frustrated with the team that they didn't pit him on the previous lap, would end up going through the red light at the exit of the pit lane, leading to him getting black flagged from the race, ending any chance he had of winning the race. Indianapolis would see the Michelin runners, one of which being Montoya, withdraw from the race on safety grounds, which led to the farcical 6-car race that was won by Michael Schumacher. After retiring at Magny-Cours thanks to an engine failure, the second half of the season would finally bring good luck for Juan, as at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone he would finally get his first win as a McLaren driver, outpacing and outsmarting Renault's Fernando Alonso throughout the race. Then at Hockenheim, Montoya would have one of the greatest drives of his career, as after crashing out in qualifying, which cost him of a certain pole position, he would carve his way back through the field to finish an impressive second behind Alonso. The next two races though would be frustrating for JPM, as he would retire from the Hungarian Grand Prix due to a driveshaft issue, and then at the first ever Turkish Grand Prix, Montoya, after colliding with Thiago Monteiro earlier on, would bottle a guaranteed second place finish on the penultimate lap due to making a mistake at the infamous Turn 8, handing second to Alonso and wrecking any chance McLaren had of getting a 1-2. He would then make amends at Monza, as after inheriting pole from Raikkonen due to him taking another engine penalty, he would come through to take his second win of the season, despite issues with his rear tyres towards the end of the race. However, at Belgium, Montoya, after starting the race from pole, would get jumped by teammate Raikkonen in the final round of stops, and then would end his race after colliding with Antonio Pizzonia whilst he was trying to lap him. Montoya would then bounce back in Brazil to lead home McLaren's first 1-2 since the 2000 Austrian Grand Prix. However, this would be overshadowed by Alonso winning his first world title, ending any hope Kimi and McLaren had of winning the title, with their season being plagued by numerous amounts of mechanical issues. Little did we know at the time that this would end up being Montoya's final win in Formula 1. At Suzuka, Montoya, looking to fight his way back through the field from 18th after getting caught out by the changeable condition in qualifying, would end up crashing out before the end of the first lap after contact with Jacques Villeneuve. Then at Shanghai, Montoya's miserable season would end on a flat note. After running over a loose drain cover, which forced him to pit, Montoya would retire later on in the race thanks to another Mercedes engine failure, ending any chance he had of claiming third in the championship and ending any hope McLaren had of winning the Constructors from Renault. At the end of the season, Montoya would finish 4th in the championship, 2 points behind Michael Schumacher, thanks to his win at the farcical Indianapolis race, and 2 points ahead of Giancarlo Fisichella, whom himself had also had a frustrating season. After a frustrating first season at McLaren, Montoya was hoping for better in 2006, but sadly for him, that didn't happen. Whilst McLaren had sorted out the reliability issues that plagued them throughout the 2005 season, they ended up taking a step backwards compared to 2005, falling behind both Renault and Ferrari, who themselves had turned a corner compared to 2005. At the first race of the season in Bahrain, Montoya was off the pace compared to Alonso and Michael, and even his teammate Kimi, who stormed his way back up to third after starting from the back due to a rear suspension failure during qualifying. He would end up finishing 5th behind the Honda of Jenson Button before finishing 4th at the next race in Malaysia. Then at Australia, Montoya's race would end up being a disaster, as after spinning at the exit at the final corner during the formation lap, Montoya would end up retiring from the race after running over the exit curb at the same corner he spun, which led to his pit lane speed limiter switching on, which he was unable to switch off. Imola would see Montoya take his first podium of the season, but he was way off both Schumacher's Ferrari and Alonso's Renault. He would then retire for the next 2 races at the Nürburgring due to an engine failure, and at Barcelona due to spinning into the gravel after qualifying a dismal 12th. At Monaco, Montoya would get what would be his final podium in F1 after inheriting the podium places from both the Williams of Mark Webber and his teammate Kimi Raikkonen, both of which suffered engine failures. A 6th place finish at Silverstone was followed by another retirement at Montreal after hitting a wall 9 laps after he took out Nico Rosberg. Then came Indianapolis and what would turn out to be Montoya's downfall in F1. After qualifying down in 11th, Montoya, along with teammate Raikkonen, would be involved in a multi-car crash on the first lap, ending both of their races early. Already at this point, Montoya had fell out of love with F1, and despite speaking with Frank Williams about a return to his team, and even having offers from Toyota and Red Bull, who at the time were still new to F1, Juan wanted to be in a winning car again, and believed that there wasn't a right offer at F1, and so wanted to find a way out of the sport for 2007. A few days after his Turn 1 crash at the US Grand Prix, JPM was in contact with Chip Ganassi, the same guy he raced for when he was in car and had been in constant contact with ever since whilst he was racing in F1. In a conversation that came by accident, Juan had told Chip that he was looking for a drive in 2007 as he had had enough of McLaren. Coincidentally, Chip told him that he was doing the same thing, as he was looking for someone to replace Casey Mears in the number 42 car in the NASCAR Cup Series. From there, he asked JPM if he was interested in the drive, to which Montoya said, "Sure, why not?" A week after the US Grand Prix, it was announced on US network Speed TV that JPM would be moving to the NASCAR Cup Series in 2007, driving the number 42 car in a move that shocked the entire motorsport community. Juan had been expecting to complete the 2006 season with McLaren before moving back to the States for 2007. However, Ron Dennis, then team principal of McLaren, not impressed that Juan and Chip had done the deal and made the announcement behind his back, sacked Montoya before the French Grand Prix with immediate effect, claiming that Montoya had been unprofessional throughout the entirety of this negotiation and was replaced for the rest of the season by the team's test and reserve driver, Pedro de la Rosa. And so, that was that. After only 5.5 years in Formula 1, with so much promise and hype behind him, Juan Pablo Montoya's Formula 1 journey was officially over. Looking back on his entire career in Formula 1, it's safe to say that the words "what if" are the best way to describe Montoya's short stint in F1. After coming into F1 with such an amazing resume, it feels wrong that all the hype that was surrounding him going into 2001 only led to 7 victories, and sadly for Juan, no World Championships. Many people believe that he is arguably one of the best drivers to never win a title. However, in my honest opinion, and being a fan of Montoya, as mentioned in my 2015 IndyCar title decider video, which you can check out in the card on the top right, I'm going to have to disagree here. Now look, do I believe that Montoya had the speed to be a world champion? Yes. Do I believe that Montoya deserved a championship in Formula 1? Maybe. Had he had stayed in Formula 1 for a lot longer than he did, then it's possible that Montoya could have won a championship before he decided to retire from F1. However, do I believe he deserved a championship during the 5.5 years that he was in F1? No. And that's coming from someone who is a fan of his. Now, don't get it twisted, Montoya on his day was a fantastic driver, definitely one of the best when it came to one-lap pace, his 2002 qualifying performances proving that, as in my opinion, he was better than Michael that year on one-lap pace. However, when it came to the race, Michael, who JPM was being compared to for most of his career, was just better than him in both endurance and tactics. And when compared to with both Kimi and Fernando, I feel like those two were better than him as well. Now that doesn't mean to say that Montoya wasn't a great driver, because he was. However, I would describe his career in the same way I've titled this video. Fast but erratic. Montoya was a very fast driver and on his day could beat anyone. However, his consistency would often let him down, as his erratic driving style would often lead to him making a lot of mistakes. When he made his debut in 2001, he was making the same errors that would define his entire Formula 1 career. And despite the amount of errors that he was making in his rookie season, which was to be expected like with any rookie, it seemed like he never learnt from those mistakes in the years after. And I feel like it was only after he left F1 that he finally learnt from those mistakes. And it was because of those mistakes that he kept making that prevented him from winning a championship. Now, people will point to 2003 as the year that got away from Juan, and it's easy to see why. Williams had a very competitive car that year that was able to fight with both Ferrari and McLaren for the title. However, even during that season, Montoya was still making some silly errors. At Australia, he spun from what should have been a comfortable victory after Michael had issues with his barge boards. Montreal, he made the same error in a race that he also should have won, given he was right behind the top 2 by the end of the race. He spun at Hungary, handing second place to Kimi Raikkonen, and then made a costly error by taking out Rubens Barrichello, which landed him a drive-through penalty, which he was forced to take during the changeable weather, which meant that by the time he switched compounds, he ended up a lap down, which he was never able to recover from, meaning he was officially out of the championship. Now, people will point to the change of construction Michelin were forced to do before the Italian Grand Prix, with many people believing that it swung the advantage back to Bridgestone and Ferrari. However, in my opinion, I don't believe that is true, as I believe Michelin still had the better tyre by the end of the season. Allow me to explain. If we break those 3 races down, which were Monza, Indianapolis and Suzuka, all of these had different variables that led to Ferrari winning those races, and they didn't involve the tyres. At Monza, which was the first race after Michelin changed the construction, Michael was under immense pressure throughout the entirety of the race by the Williams of Juan Pablo Montoya, with Montoya doing everything to try and pass Michael. And if we look at the gap between them during qualifying, only 51 thousandths separated them. Given Monza is about straight line speed as opposed to tyres, I still believe that even if Michelin had kept the same construction that they had had throughout the season up until this point, I still believe Ferrari would have won at Monza, as I believe their car was best suited to the straight line speed dependent Monza. You may disagree with that, but that's my honest opinion. At Indianapolis, Kimi Raikkonen, who was also running Michelin's, took pole position, and in the race, he was actually leading comfortably and could have won the race had it not been for the changeable conditions. When the track eventually became wet, it fell into the hands of Ferrari, as they were able to use the Bridgestone intermediates, which had proven to be a thorn in Michelin's side in the previous 2 years. Thanks to the Bridgestone intermediates, it allowed Michael to cruise his way to his 6th win of the season, bringing him one step closer to the title. Had it not been for the wet weather, Kimi would have easily had won that race. And finally, we come to Suzuka. Now, yes, Rubens did win that race comfortably ahead of the McLarens, who themselves looked off the pace. However, it's not the McLarens that I'm on about here. At the start of the race, Montoya overtook Barrichello before the end of lap 1 and began to pull a gap. However, on lap 9, Montoya would ground to a hole thanks to an hydraulics issue, which had he not had, there is a chance that Montoya would have won the race comfortably like he did at Hockenheim. But it wasn't just Montoya, as throughout the first 9 laps, and even the laps after Montoya had retired, Barrichello was under pressure from future world champion Fernando Alonso, another driver who was also running Michelin tyres. And even though Barrichello built a bit of a gap after the first stops, Fernando was starting to catch up again, and he could have had a shot at snatching the victory from Rubens had his Renault engine not given up the ghost on lap 17. That is why whenever I hear people say Ferrari only won the 2003 title because of that late construction change Michelin had to do, it really baffles me, because if you break those 3 races down like I've just done now, you will find that wasn't the case. In reality, the late construction change Michelin had to do barely made any difference in my opinion. Ferrari won at Monza because their car was just suited to the track, given they had done many tests there, as back then teams were allowed to do in-season testing. They won at Indianapolis because of the changeable conditions, and arguably Barrichello inherited the win from Montoya and potentially Alonso had he caught up and passed him due to the pair suffering from mechanical failures. So really, when I look at it, Montoya lost the championship all on his own. The amount of mistakes he made during 2003 cost him a handful of points, which could have proved vital in his pursuit of the driver's title and Williams' pursuit of the constructor's title. But let's not end this video on a sour note. I do feel that had Montoya learnt from his mistakes from 2001 and tidied his driving up a bit, I do feel he could have won a championship, whether that was with Williams or McLaren. And I do believe, had he won that title in 2003, I do believe he would have stayed in F1 for a lot longer than he did, and he wouldn't have had the frustration that he had when he moved to McLaren. However, at the same time, it's safe to say that Montoya leaving F1 actually did him a lot of good. After the guest appearance he made at Homestead in 2006 that prepared for his NASCAR debut in 2007, it was very clear that Montoya was enjoying racing again. And when he returned to IndyCar in 2014, his driving style had definitely improved, as the erratic driving that was there when he was in F1 had thankfully gone away and been replaced by a fast and sensible driving style. In 2015, he would compete for the IndyCar title, which if it wasn't for a collision with teammate Will Power through no fault of his own, Montoya would have easily had won the title. Whilst it was gutting to see him lose that title, at least he proved to everyone that he always had the speed to win a title with his improved driving style. It's just a shame that we never got to see that in F1. It's literally just a simple case of what if? Just what if?